Did you ever want tons of command points but not want to pay very much for them? Well, the Imperial Guard might have you covered. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're back for another Imperial Guard video, and this time we're going to be looking at the question of exactly how cheap we can field brigades for, and weighing them up against our cheapest battalions. As 40k factions go, Guard have one of the biggest choices out there, and unlike Space Marines, who are the other one who have absolutely tons of options, we have far cheaper units. This means that we have really quite a lot of flexibility when fielding cheap brigades and battalions. It means that we can usually have an ample supply ourselves, and also be very good allies to others. In this video we're going to look at our cheapest units for filling each of the force organisation slots, and then put them together in a few very cheap Guard battalions and Guard brigades. So without further ado, let's get into it and take a look. Here we have some of the cheapest options for filling out our brigades. Starting in the HQ section, the very cheapest is actually the Death Corps of Krieg Field Officer for 23 points. He's essentially the equivalent of a platoon commander, but unlike our standard platoon commanders, he lives in the HQ section. Unfortunately, if you do field some sort of mixed brigade and mixing him in with non-Krieg units, then it will mean that you lose any regimental detachment benefits, such as Kazachan's brutal strength for example, so usually shaving off the 7 points isn't worth it, but if you want to field our very cheapest battalions, then he is there. Next we have the tried and tested company commander. At just 30 points is a pretty reasonable little HQ choice, giving solid buffs to our line infantry and also being able to move ridiculously fast with move, which can make him good for running around and capturing objectives in an allied list. The Tempesta Prime is the version of him that can order Scions and also deep strike, so be a bit of a behind enemy lines commando, even though he isn't going to kill very much. And another cheap option is a Lord Commissar, which can be particularly handy if you do start filling up your slots with lots of company commanders already. In the elite slot we really are spoilt for choice. The cheapest is the Astropath when you just field him with a las pistol, which is pretty good as Astropaths are actually really solid. Even if they have literally nothing to buff, then they have some psychic denial abilities and can throw a few mortal wounds down range. But if you do have a guard unit worth buffing, then you can increase its survivability with Night Shroud and Psychic Barrier. They're excellent little brigade fillers. Slightly more expensive because of his bolt pistol we have the Commissar. I don't think he provides anywhere near as much utility as Astropaths if we're just looking to fill out brigades, but I guess one couldn't hurt for keeping your infantry squads in line a bit more. Out of Codex we have the Elysian Sniper teams. These sort of have a heavy weapon team's profile, with deep strike, and they're just armed with a sniper rifle, so not going to do any significant damage, but a nice cheap little ranged distraction unit who might just blink off a wound off a character or two over the course of the game. Wordvane Psychers aren't particularly effective when fielded in these low numbers, but if you are upgrading to a Primaris Psyker, then the new stratagem from the Greater Good book can actually make them reasonably decent casters, and again at 21 points they fill up brigades pretty cheaply. You can get 2 Crusaders for 26 points if you want a couple of blokes with storm shields, and a special weapon squad with snipers can cost you 30 points, and I'll admit I left out the command squad, which is another solid option provided you have a company commander in the HQ slot who are 24 points bare bones, but usually you're going to want to give them at least 1 or 2 special weapons to make use of their good ballistic skill. Troops wise, the cheapest are the Scion squad with 35 points. Now they went down in cost. Their damage output and survivability isn't as good as the infantry squad in my opinion, but being able to drop in anywhere really is a big advantage, and adding them to an allied list will give you some decent utility in capturing objectives. The infantry squad are absolutely tried and tested, one of the better troops choices in the game, very cheap, you get a lot of bodies, and they can be decently threatening to light infantry when they're ordered to first rank, second rank fire. They shouldn't be underestimated their speed as well, what with move, zooming them across the battlefield like jet bikes. For fast attack choices, there's only really one option with cheap brigade fillers, and that's the Sentinel. Both the Armors and Scout variants when armed with multi-lasers are only 35 points now. Though I do find the multi-lasers a little bit underwhelming, I'd be highly tempted to upgrade to an autocannon or missile launcher for just 5 points more. For the heavy support section, we've very sadly lost our cheapest option, which was the Mortar Heavy Weapon Squad, which was only 33 points. With the recent and slightly random points increase in Chapter Approved, it now is up to 45 points, so isn't quite as good value. For heavy weapon teams, now the cheapest is the Heavy Bolter team for 42 points in the Codex. But if you are happy to use some Forge World gun platforms, then both the Tarantula battery with heavy bolters and the Saber battery with heavy stubbers are both 34 points. They're both essentially static gun turrets with some general purpose weaponry. Out of the two, I think I prefer the Sabre just because it's a little bit more flexible, being able to target the actual target that it wants to without any sort of automated fire rules. 12 heavy stubber shots also isn't terrible for a unit of its points cost. Finally, I just thought I'd mention the Sentinel Powerlifters here. They do basically the same job as Sentinels with a bit of a close combat slant, being in disruption, distraction and forward units to try and get in the enemy's face and block movement and things. If you're looking to get a few more tough armour things on the board, then it's not the worst idea, particularly as they can get towards the enemy quite quickly with their scout move. So if we put these all together into actual formations, what does it look like? It turns out that the cheapest battalion that we can field is 151 points, with the Death Corps of Krieg officers and Scion squads. So it actually isn't the worst formation ever. The Scion squads could just jump on some objectives, and the Death Corps of Krieg officers could run around with move, scoring some objectives. I think you can gain a fair bit of utility by paying a few extra points though, the most obvious options being a Scion battalion for 175 points, with 2 Tempesta primes and 3 Scion squads. The other option is of course the tried and tested Loyal 32, with 180 points for 2 company commanders and 3 infantry squads. You could even mix and match a bit, maybe 2 infantry squads and 1 Scion squad for example, depending on exactly what you think that the army is lacking. If I was taking a guard as allies, I'd typically think about if there was anything else that I could add in that would really make sense. And as I'm sure you all know who have been watching the series, I absolutely love guard astropaths with Psychic Maelstrom. For 15 points you get an actual quite dangerous psyker on the field, and if you are just allying in a Loyal 32, I would highly recommend trying one of these guys out. He's one of the most undercosted models in the game, point for point, and a reasonable add-in for just 15 points to virtually any army. If we move on to brigades, the actual cheapest brigade that we can form is 531 points, with the Death Corps of Krieg officers, astropaths, scions, sentinels, and either tarantulas or sabres. These guys really don't have a ton of synergy with each other than being a slightly flimsy multiple small units type units that have a bit of anti-infantry firepower but aren't really going to achieve that much on the board. If you restrict yourself to just the Astra Militarum Codex and ignored Forge World, then we've got company commanders, astropaths, scions, sentinels and heavy bolter heavy weapon teams for 576 points, although in all honesty if I was fielding a guard brigade as allies to provide command points, I would still recommend just investing that little bit more to make the units a bit more effective. In the last example we've spent about 50 more points, but it just makes a lot more sense. We've got 2 company commanders and 4 infantry squads for them to order around to secure the backfield objectives, 2 Scion squads to drop down on forward objectives and a Tempesta Prime to order them. I've kept the 3 astropaths as they're just very good and good value all in all. I'd give those sentinels autocannons or missile launchers so they can actually provide a little bit of damage. I think that's a reasonable upgrade for 5 points. And I've changed the heavy bolter heavy weapon team back to mortars. They still aren't quite as good as they used to be, what with the nerf to their points value, but at least they can hide out of line of sight and hopefully be shooting all game long and provide a bit of useful ignores line of sight firepower. If you had even more points to invest, I'd strongly consider thinking about swapping out the mortars for something like wyverns or basilisks, which can be a useful addition to virtually any list, and you could even soup them up even further by making them tank cases for flat 3 damage basilisks or something. Overall, if it's just command points that you're after, the battalions do give you more command points per point than the brigade does. The main issue is the amount of detachments that you can field. Typically in match play 2000 point games, the recommendation is 3 detachments. So if you have a couple of detachments spare and you're using just one for your core of your army, running a couple of cheap Loyal 32s or Scion battalions could give you a decent amount of command points for a very low investment indeed. The Guard Brigade does require you to invest a fair bit more points in some of the units that you might not necessarily have chosen. They really aren't going to help you out all that much with dealing damage to the enemy, but they should be making a reasonable job of securing objectives, while hopefully the souped up rest of your army, with all the command points that they have available, should be able to get stuck into the foe good and proper. If you really wanted all the command points, you could even combine the two a bit, maybe take that slightly more effective brigade alongside a Loyal 32 or Scion battalion, and you'd have a tasty 17 command points for your 800 point investment. Could certainly leave your actual damage dealers with a lot of toys to play with. Overall, my takeaway is that if you want command points, typically battalions are better, but detachment limits can be an issue and make you want to go for a brigade. If you're taking guard, think about using other useful guard units, such as the Psychic Maelstrom Astropath or guard artillery. And if you're going for a brigade, it probably will make sense to invest a bit more than the minimum to actually make the units more functional in the field, so you get decent value out of the units as well as just the command points. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on the guard command point generation that we can do, and if there's any other cheap units that I've missed that you'd consider yourself to fill any of the detachment slots. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We have regular content coming out for the guard every few days. And if you've been enjoying the videos, if you'd like to support the channel, I do have a Patreon page, the link's in the description below, and it's what allows this channel to keep on making videos. So if you have been watching a lot of them, any support is absolutely greatly appreciated. I can only keep on doing this because of the Patreon support. In any case, a massive thank you for watching, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.